Hi, I'm Sherry and this is Gardening in the North. And today we're going to be fermenting carrots. So there is a lot of talk out there right now about fermentation, and I've been doing a lot of research. I bought some books. I've been watching a lot of videos. I've been watching a lot of videos 2 and 3 times because when you watch a video, you often lose or miss some of the vital pieces that you need from that video. And so I've been going back and watching them again. And the fermentation process is so easy. I thought that it was going to be a lot more complex and that there'd be a lot more steps involved. And I have to tell you, everything that I've been reading indicates that it is an extremely easy process. Now, last week I did a video on fermenting sauerkraut and it turned out amazing. So when I did a taste test between the old school water bath sauerkraut method and the fermented sauerkraut method, both my husband and I liked the fermented method better. It was crunchy, it had a really nice fresh taste to it. And I think that going forward, we're probably going to do both methods for various things. Like, we will decide on what we want to preserve and the reason we want to preserve it and pick the method that suits us at that time. Now, we know that adding salt to the fermenting process allows those really good bacteria, those probiotics, to grow and live, and we want that. That's what we want to eat. Those are the good things for our gut health. So knowing that the fermented process is really good for us healthy-wise, I was thinking about other things that having fermented foods in my fridge would be good for. And that is one of the reasons why I want to do carrots today. So I don't know about you, but my children don't always want to eat cooked vegetables. They will gladly eat a lot of raw vegetables. My youngest son is probably the most picky out of all 3 of my children, and we have to cut up a cucumber for every meal. It's one of the vegetables that he will eat. Now, he will eat raw carrots as well, but let's be honest, cutting up a carrot takes a tiny bit more time than cutting up a cucumber. Cucumber, you can wash it up, slice it, he eats the skin, so it's good to go. It takes us literally 60 seconds. Carrots are a little bit more because you want to wash and peel and then slice up. Now, I know that doesn't take a lot of time, right? But when you're preparing a meal and now you have to stop to cut up a carrot, sometimes it can be a little bit time consuming. The other thing is my son packs his own lunch. And so any of you know that when your children pack a lunch, they're not putting a lot of thought into it. They're going into the fridge and they are grabbing whatever is easy. Now, we do have a rule in the house that he has to take an apple or some kind of fruit in his lunch, and he takes a yogurt, and he's not a big sandwich kind of kid, so he ends up taking a lot of snacking foods. So a lot of, sometimes he'll take a couple pickles, and then he'll take crackers, and sometimes he takes bags of cereal. So he really does have a lunch full of snacky foods that will sustain him throughout the day. But, homesteaders, farmers, gardeners, we all talk about being self-sufficient, being reliant on ourselves, meaning we are growing the food that we're eating and we're less reliant on the big box stores and the grocery stores. And I want my children to be self-sufficient and reliant on themselves as well. And so I want to make sure that we have the proper food in our fridge, in our cupboards for our children, so that when they go in to make their lunch, they can be self-sufficient in grabbing the appropriate foods that they need. And part of that is making sure that there is food in the fridge that is accessible and easy. Because we all know that children, not all children, but a lot of children are lazy. And so what that means is that they're going to be grabbing all of the starches and the carbs, and they're not going to take the healthy foods unless it's an apple because it's easy to grab, clean it off, throw it in your lunch. So today I want to do 3 different kinds of fermented carrots, and in the hope that I'll let my children try them. If they like them, it's really easy for them to scoop some out onto their plate. I can just put the jar on the table, and anyone who wants carrots for that meal can just take it. Likewise, my son can grab a little container, scoop out a couple carrots into it, and take that in his lunch. Now, let's talk about what we're going to put in it, because there is a lot of conversation happening out there on what to put in it, how to make it, different things like that. Now, the actual process of fermenting is all the same and everybody's doing it the same way, but I've watched a lot of videos and I'm finding that there are a lot of inconsistencies. One of the inconsistencies that I've noticed after watching a lot of videos on fermentation, as well as looking through the books that I purchased, was that some people end up with a fermented vegetable that is crunchy and crisp, and others end up with a vegetable that is soft or mushy. Now, ending up with a soft or mushy carrot is not going to be ideal for my family. I have 1 child out of 3 that will eat cooked carrots. He loves them. The other 2, not so much. They will eat raw carrots, but if they're cooked, they won't touch them. I'm not sure why, because the taste doesn't change all that much. In doing additional research to figure out why some people end up with a more crunchy vegetable as opposed to a softer vegetable, I have realized that some people add tannin to their jars. Now, there are 3 different types of tannin that you can add to your jar. One, if you have fresh grape leaves, you can add them. If you have regular tea bags, which is black tea, you can add that to the bottom of your jar as well, or you can add bay leaves. Now, I don't have fresh grape leaves, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a jar where I add bay leaves. I'm also going to do a jar where I add the tea bag, and then I'm going to do a jar where I add none of that. And I'm going to let all 3 jars ferment for the exact same time period and then taste them and see what's the difference. Does the bay leaf add a different flavor to it? Does the tea bag change the color? Is the jar where I add nothing to it soft and mushy, or is it crisp? I mean, if it ends up being crisp, I won't have any answers. But I'm going to do 3 jars, 3 different ways to see which one has the better taste and the better consistency in being crisp and firm. Another inconsistency that I have noticed while watching some other videos is some people will take the amount of salt that you need to use and put it into another container, so another mason jar or a measuring cup, something like that, and add in the desired amount of water. Mix it all up until it's all dissolved, and then pour that onto the vegetables that are in your jar. Other people actually take the salt and pour it onto their vegetables in the jar and then pour the water over top. Now, I know that there is some discussion on whether or not the salt that you add to your fermentation makes your vegetables salty. I don't know if that's true or not. I mean, all of the videos that I've watched, whether they do it one way or the other, they all say that their vegetable is not salty. So I am going to listen to what they're saying, and I'm going to try it and then see if I agree with them or not. One thing that I am going to do is I'm going to dissolve my salt into a separate container of water and pour in what I need, as opposed to putting it all into the container. And the only reason I'm going to do it like that is to kind of, I guess, limit the amount of salt that's in there. Now, having said that, the salt is what will help those probiotics to actually grow and thrive, as well as kill off the bad bacteria that you don't want. So having the right amount of salt in there is very important. And I will monitor it very closely to ensure that as the days go by and my jars are fermenting, that I'm not seeing any dark bubbling or dark discoloration on the top of my vegetables, because then I know that something's gone wrong. Now, if I do see some, white, frosty kind of foam stuff that's filming or, starting on the top of my jar, then I can just scoop that out and discard it, and the jar would still be okay. The other inconsistency that I've noticed is the length of time that people are telling you to ferment your vegetable for. Now, I've come to realize that that inconsistency has to do with the time of year. So if you're making something in the heat of the summertime and your house is naturally warmer, then that product is actually going to ferment a lot faster. In the winter time, when your house is probably a little bit cooler, it will take a little bit longer for that vegetable to ferment. So you need to keep that in mind. So if you're reading a recipe and it says in 3 days, your carrots will be done, and you try them in 3 days and it's winter time and they don't taste like they're ready, that's because they haven't had enough time. Your house is cooler and they really do need a nice warm area. For those of you that have been a part of my gardening journey, know that we are really excited about getting chickens in the springtime. And part of, knowing in our heads that we're getting chickens in the springtime, we're already preparing things that we need to have those chickens so that we're 100% ready and hopefully aren't surprised by anything. Having said that, normally, when I peel a carrot and cut the ends off, I will do one of two things. I will either walk it out to the compost bin, dump it in, throw in some leaves, give it a mix, and call it a day. Or in the winter time when it's really, really cold and I don't necessarily want to walk out to a frozen pile of compost through the snow, I will put it into a Ziploc bag and throw it in the freezer. And then if I want to make some kind of broth in the wintertime to go with a soup, I can pull out one of those bags and use that stuff. Now, what I'm going to do now, because we know that we're getting chickens, is I'm going to peel these carrots, cut off the ends, the pieces that we're not going to use, and I am going to place it into a couple different lunch-size Ziploc bags and place them into the freezer, knowing that there was going to be a period of time before my garden gets really going and a period afterwards in the late fall when my garden has had enough and it's not producing enough of those luscious greens and healthy garden foods for the chickens. And what I'll do is I'll be able to pull out one of these bags with the carrots in it, add it to something else, blend it up, and give it to the chickens as a treat. Now, if my freezers were full, I wouldn't necessarily do this. I wouldn't look for another freezer so that I could start packing it in with treats or chickens or kitchen scraps for the chickens. But for those of you that have been with me on my gardening journey, you know that I had 90 pounds of tomatoes in my freezer to make tomato sauce. So I have lots of space still. So I am just gonna start packing them in there and keeping them for when I need them. Let's start filling the jars. I started to fill this one up already. Now this one is going to be the jar that only has the salt brine in it. This one here is going to have the tea bag, so that'll just go in there. And these carrots will just basically go right on top like that, and I will just fill that jar right up. The bay leaves, I'm actually going to put in probably, I'm going to say maybe 2 on the bottom, and I might do some in the middle and then a little bit on top. So maybe I'll do 5 altogether. So we'll just start putting some of these in there. Okay, you can see this one standing up. That one doesn't want to lay down. Okay. Okay, I'm just going to throw in 2 more. Now I want to talk a little bit about weighting these down. Now, really when you do a ferment, you should have some kind of weight that will keep the vegetables or whatever it is you're fermenting underneath that brine. Because if it's underneath that brine, that means that oxygen isn't getting at it, and you know, it decreases the chances of having bad bacteria grow. Now, because I'm using carrots, I think that I can get away with just using a cabbage leaf and putting the brine on top of that cabbage leaf to really keep it down. I'm going to try it, and the reason that I'm going to try it is I ordered some weights and they haven't arrived yet, but I really want to try this experiment now. I have time now, so I want to do it, knowing that this is probably going to take about 5 days to ferment anyways. These will probably ferment perfectly in the 5 days, just as those weights arrive at my door, because that's really how it goes, right? So I am just going to fill all of these in, fill all of these up. I am going to cover them with a brine. Now the brine that I'm using is strictly water and salt. So I have a jar filled with warm water. I'm going to put 1 tablespoon of Himalayan salt in here, and you can use whatever salt that you have. I would just urge that if you're using white salt, you might want to reconsider, because white salt has been bleached. Now, I am going to put, like I said, 1 tablespoon of salt in this jar, and this would be the jar that I use for one of these jars for the brine. Now, there is some talk about using whey as well. So you can use, I think it's a 1/4 cup or a 1/2 cup of whey in this mixture as well. The only thing is that it does, so the good thing about the whey is that it's a good bacteria that will speed up your fermentation process. But it also changes the taste of your ferment. So I will do a video where I compare the two, using the whey and not using it, and see which one we like better. But for this experiment here, to see if my children will like the fermented carrots, I just want that nice fresh taste that you would get if you were to just slightly pickle them. And I don't want that sour, milky, buttery taste that you might get by adding the whey. So I am going to actually add, so because I'm not adding the whey to this, I'm going to add an extra 1/2 teaspoon of salt to my brine. So in total, I'm adding 1 tablespoon and 1/2 teaspoon. Now I know that seems like a lot of salt, but I have done the research and figured out that everyone, like I said, there was a lot of inconsistencies on what people are doing, but the one consistency was that no matter how much salt people added, it didn't taste salty. So again, I will let you know once I taste this. So that one's good. So I'm just going to add them all in, all the salt now, because I want it to dissolve before I pour it in, because I'm not going to need all the brine, but I want to make sure that the majority of the salt gets added in. Okay, so now I'm going to do this one and 1 tablespoon. You can just see that it's kind of swirling, the pink swirling around on the bottom there. So that's just going to take a little bit to dissolve. And then whatever, I'm going to do my best to dissolve it as I fill the jars. But whatever doesn't dissolve just doesn't get put into the jar. Okay, so let's get this. Push it down as much as I can. And I'm just going to stop adding carrots basically at the neckline. Now I know this is a wide mouth jar, but I'm basically going to stop just before the first ring on the rim. Okay, and this is the one with the tea bag. And so this is going to be really interesting to see if it changes the actual color in this jar compared to the other jars. So I may need to peel and cut maybe 2 more carrots. And you just really want to push down. I'm going to add the brine to them, and then I will give it a bit of a shake, move it around, try to get any air bubbles that are in there out of there so that I can add a little bit more brine after I add the cabbage leaves. Okay, so I have to say that I think I did a pretty good job eyeballing how many carrots I might need. I probably only need 1 more carrot. So I'm going to cut that up, add it in, and then I'm going to add the cabbage leaves back on, or add the cabbage leaves in and bring you back. So I have added the brine to each of the carrots. And now I'm just going to take a little bit of cabbage and I'm going to stick it inside. I'm going to push down because I really do want the brine over top of the cabbage as well, because essentially the cabbage will act as that weight that I don't have by holding down the carrots from floating up. Now I'm going to be putting that, I can't remember what it's called, the nipple lid. I'm going to be putting that on top, and that essentially will also keep the carrots underneath the brine, because if the cabbage starts to come up, it will be pushed down from that lid. So I'm just going to stick that in there. So that one's good. Do the next one. And then what I'll do is I will add more brine. And I'm just pushing down. And so I don't know if you can see that, but as I do that, bubbles are coming up. Okay. And the last one here. Okay, there we go. Now I'm just going to add a little bit more brine. Okay, there we go. I think we are good. So I'm going to put these on. Now, before I move these off of here, I will wipe the outside of them, and then I will use a little bit of hockey tape, sock tape, and I will write on them what I've done to each one so that I don't lose track of that. Okay, so one thing to mention is that if you don't have these particular lids, you can use a regular canning lid. The only thing is you're gonna put your canning lid on and then your ring, and a couple times a day, you're gonna come around and you're just going to loosen that, let a bit of the air out, and then tighten it back up. Now, I'm fairly new to the fermentation process, so I've not used that method before. I know that there are people out there that have used it for years and years and years, but I really wanted to try these lids, see how they work. Now, there are other lids that you can use as well, and they actually have a contraption that you can watch to see if the liquid is kind of rising and bubbling up to know whether or not, you know, if there's been a lot of extra brine made from the actual vegetable, and you can gauge if it's going to overflow or not. I am going to place all of these jars into like on top of a cookie sheet or something like that, and I'm actually going to keep them under this cupboard here, because this cupboard is an area where it won't get direct sunlight, but it's not a cool area either, because you don't necessarily want them to be in a cold place, because that will really slow down your fermentation process and you'll be waiting forever. So I will check these in about 5 days, taste wise, see if I think that they're ready or not for the family to try. And if they are, then I will replace these lids that are on here with one of these lids here. Is just made by Ball, and it'll just spin on, and it's easy to spin off and spin on and use. And that's all there is to it. That's it. It's done. Like, look at how pretty the nice color is. So nice. And then here's the one with the bay leaf in it. That's it. It's not as scary as it may appear when you hear the word fermentation. Thanks for spending time with me.